justice. Good day to you, partner. I'm keen, and I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken killer.
Hey guys, Wheat Solo here, aka the Skeleton King. So we are finally doing the follow-up video to my original Carrion Wind testing for Shmitty on what I think would be the best way to build a Innocence-based druid. Now it's not necessarily a wind proc-based druid, but it's just you put an Innocence on a druid, what's the best way to play it? I think this is what it is. Now, first off, I set up the character very lazily because I'm just using all these 20 life small charms with 5 res. I also have a couple of +7 skills or +5 skills here and there, etc., etc. As you can see, I'm going to be taking them on and off because I don't want my lycanthropy or my call to arms to be too out of line with what you would probably actually have on the character. Because you don't have a lot of plus skills, but then I also need them there for the Spirit of the BORBs and then the Carrion Vine. And then someone at this point might say, Wheat Solo, how much do you expect someone to actually snap on a build? And it's like, yes, it's up to the player. Now, the more I've played Druid, the more I've realized a Druid can get very high skills in their summons, just like a Necromancer. Let's even say just as high. The problem is the chance that you get that gear is way lower. People don't really pick up the magic helms. Oh God, what are they called? Pelts? Is that what they're called? Actually, I think they're called pelts. Anyway, let's call them pelts. People don't pick up magic pelts as much, and then the clubs also aren't picked up as much, and you can't shop them. So even though people don't pick up magic wands, which like it's stupid, you can just shop a magic wand. So just the fact that you can basically easily shop +6 or +7, with a corruption, and that a druid can't easily do the same, it's kind of rough. But anyways, I'm basically doing an approximation of pretty good gear with a pretty substantial snap, okay? So keep that in mind, that it's not ridiculous, you can get more skills, but this would be either some amount of a snap or you would not have more shapeshift skillers. And actually, I do think you should play this build without shapeshift skillers, which is one of the reasons why my shapeshift skills are so low, but then I was worried that maybe they're a little bit too low. Again, maybe I should make this build one more time and actually create what it would look like on live, not just in Plucky. Now, as you can see, I actually did end up going with an Emilio in, a Thorns-based Emilio Defiance Merc. Why is that? When I was testing the build out, I actually felt like I was going too fast for any other Merc, and basically they weren't either procking amp, which is like the number one thing you would want with this build, right? Like I'm actually going to be using an Atmos over a Metal Grid, and it's like, which one is better? Well, I think actually a Metal Grid is better partly because the resistances are so good, but Atmos still has a lot of attacker takes damage, and as you can see, my ATD went quite high on this build without corruptions. That's another thing to think of, okay? None of this gear is corrupted. How much more ATD can you get on this build? Actually a bit. You gotta understand you can get an ATD character level corruption on your shield and your belt. I don't have those. So you know how I said that the summon skills are a little out of line, as in I don't think a lot of players would swap that much. Um, if you actually take into the fact that I don't have corruptions, maybe it balances out and it's actually pretty fair. Especially because I don't have any sockets for my shield either, things like that, and some more open wound percentage or some more ATD in that regard as well would kind of make up for it. So basically, let's think of it this way. Maybe the Spirit of BORBs is about right, my ATD, but maybe the Poison Creeper is a bit too strong, and like I think Poison Creeper is really, really, really good, okay? Like there's a reason I put him on this build. I think 20-point Poison Creeper should basically be on about every single Druid build that can fit it. Are they a little slow? Yes. You don't know when I saw that drop how upset I was. I was like, couldn't I have been playing, on ladder instead of making this dumb fucking video? Get a beer rune and then make it, but it is what it is. RNG, right? Every time you kill a mob, you just cha-chink, pull the lotto machine, and I happened to roll really high when it didn't matter. Kind of like the rest of my life. Anyways, back to the character because we do have some more things to talk about. As you can see, I actually think you don't need to attack much. As you know from my ATD Druid Live, which is not Innocence based, and yes, you could make a more ATD version variant of it, but it's kind of like once you start to run Innocence and you lose the Steel Carapace, you kind of start going this direction. By the way, should I be running Carrion Winds on my live Druid? Yes, that just was an oversight. For some reason, I knew it had ATD. It was one of the reasons why I was excited to make this build in the first place. And there's just so many items in this game, it's easy to lose track of one. Okay, so trying to finish everything up, I went with Emilio. Why? Again, they just wouldn't proc amp enough, so I put on an Atmos Scarab. That's just to do the boss. Again, if you were actually to play this build, you could easily get away with a Metal Grid, which again has some more ATD and some better stats on it overall, especially the defense, okay? There is some problems with squishiness on this build on live, or Schmitty is having some problems with squishiness. So caveat, again, Schmitty and I probably need to talk a bit about what would be reasonable targets for this build to achieve on live, so I don't represent it in a way that is not accurate to what it would actually feel like to play. Because I don't want someone to actually end up making this build and go, holy shit, it's way too squishy. I would feel pretty bad. I'd want it to be, okay, I know what I'm getting into if I wanted to make this build. I just think that's fair. So, I kind of forget where I was, which sucks. Right, the Merc choice. So I was able to use a different Merc besides Emilio and lose Defiance. Oh, I was talking about Metal Grid as well, and that defense actually helps. It really does. But when I wasn't running Emilio, the problem was the Merc was dying or just not proccing amp enough, because I actually run pretty quickly. And again, it's not as fast as a teleport, but the problem is, I've noticed this with Running Man style builds, the more you run, the less your Merc actually stops to aggro and do something. So basically, Act 1 didn't work. You could think, well, what about an Act 3 Innocence Merc? I went, yeah, that could maybe work, and in fact, maybe it's worth trying, especially because you could still get Defiance on it and stuff, and I don't think you can get a source of amp, but you can get multiple sources of Decrepify. I don't think you can get amp on his weapon. I can't remember. But you can get more static fielder stuff or just more survivable things as well. So prayer, etc. So that's definitely an option. But basically, I just felt like I don't want to rely on the Merc having to actually touch an enemy with Innocence, so Emilio is the choice. He gives me more attacker takes damage, which is a huge part of this build, and I get Defiance, which again, this build is squishy, and it was kind of squishy when I was running Act 1. Yes, Vigor was really nice, but I was like, whoa, my health is getting chunked. As you might have noticed, when those Fanaticism Moonlords attacked me, I lost half my health super, super quickly. And again, it's not min-max. Oh, here's the Fanaticism Moonlords. Yeah, so that was just one double swing, right? And he just happened to hit twice. And so, yeah, like some of my defensive stats are a little out of whack, and other ones maybe could be a little bit higher. But again, let's move on. Let's just assume I'm more tanky than I should be. Also, anyone astute might have noticed my call to arms wasn't working. That happens sometimes. I'm going to realize that when I do the boss, and I go to reapply it, and I go, it was never on in the first place, was it? Because this is like a 6-minute map. So I'm like, why is it already off? And it just happens sometimes with O skills that they don't work properly. And again, you can see you can actually do a boss with this build, especially with the Atmas. Now, is it optimal? I think you can actually just play this build in a couple different ways. Either you can run it so you can kill a boss, you can run it so you can kill most of the enemies in a map, or you can kind of play it the more pacifist style, which is the way I play my ATD Druid, where you don't even have an attack and you just run past all the enemies in open chest. Now, caveat, if you do play it that way, you're going to need to prioritize defense a little more. So like Atmos wouldn't be an option. You would need the Metal Grid, and there might even have to be a couple of other changes to your choices in gear. Like for instance, I went really heavily into my wind synergies, and that's kind of another thing. It's like, is it fair on this build where yes, I may be lacking some defensive stats, but I basically get to use all these spare points into wind synergies, while it might be more reasonable to put more points into lycanthropy? or even hunger. Now my hunger is not out of line, but it's definitely pretty high and I don't have a lot of points into it. So there's a couple of things with this build where I'm going to have to figure out what would be the actual representation of this build on live. Again, other caveat is I don't have corruptions, so I could get some more faster run walk, like I could get faster run walk on my Carrion wins and my boots, and that's like 30%. So that's again kind of why I chose to do it the way I did with hunger. So it's like I'm trying to walk a fine line between what's rational and reasonable and what isn't. So that was the map. It went pretty well. I think this is the best way to build it. I'm going to talk to Schmitty. You guys give me some feedback. We'll go from there. And I'm really excited to see what this build could do with a little more input and make it so you know what to expect if you build it live. Skelly King out. GG.
Come play with us, Danny. Forever.